We are filming this video today on May 30th, and I realize that in front of the House, well, past the House, are some significant changes to the PPP program. So one of the things we're going to cover today is really just a broad view of the PPP loan, the EIDL advance, and the EIDL loan. Nothing that we're seeing in the proposed legislation is going to change how those items interact. And next week we might be busy unpacking and refining some of the changes that we see if legislation passes. So wanted to just make sure all we're aware that we've got our eyes on that, and we're going to kind of pounce on that legislation just as soon as it arrives to ensure that we can get back to strategizing about how it is you can open back up your practice. Today we're going to talk about differences between the PPP loan and the EIDL loan, between the EIDL loan and the EIDL advance, and how the PPP loan and EIDL advance are going to work together, and then just give you some considerations as a lot of you are being confronted with, do you take that EIDL loan or not? So starting at kind of the highest level that we can, the PPP loan, and some of this is material we've discussed before, but it's an SBA 7A loan. You receive the loan from a lending institution, and generally that SBA 7A loan program is designed to be a small business loan as a lender of last resort. With the CARES Act, that is the system that they use for the PPP loan, which then is designed to be forgiven, has significant restrictions, and it's tied to the EIDL advance. So what's an EIDL loan? An EIDL loan is an SBA B2 loan. It is directly administered by the SBA, and they are small business loans that come into play when a disaster has been declared. With the CARES Act, they introduced the EIDL advance, which was formerly known as a grant, and it is tied to the PPP. So what's the difference between the EIDL loan and the EIDL advance? Well, what we are seeing for EIDL loans that are coming out right now is that they are a 30-year term, a 3.75% interest rate. We have 12 months of no payment, and the max amount that we're seeing in a pretty standardized and consistent amount is $150,000. The use for that EIDL loan is working capital to alleviate economic injury. So a very broad category of things you can utilize it for. Within that EIDL system, though, is this EIDL advance. So what is that separate deposit, the EIDL advance? Well, that was the $1,000 per employee, formerly was going to be $10,000 per borrower. There is no rate to it. There is no term to it. There is no repayment to it, but it reduces PPP forgiveness. So that's why they stopped referring to it as a grant and started referring to it as an advance. The uses in the CARES Act for that EIDL advance is to maintain payroll, provide sick leave, rental cost, repaying obligations, and increase cost to obtain materials. So we want to distinguish the EIDL advance from the PPP loan, but understand that that EIDL advance is just that. It is an advance of the PPP forgiveness. So the EIDL advance has no explicit time frame to it. Restricted use, but those are some pretty broad terms we saw there at the end. And it's tied to the PPP loan in the forgiveness application, which you can see a couple of excerpts from that on the bottom part of the slide here. So what that application asks us to do is go through, get all of your PPP forgiveness numbers in order. When we go for the application, what's going to happen is your borrower is going to submit that application. You have to identify what was the EIDL advance amount and what was the EIDL application number. When the lender receives funding for your forgiveness, that will be reduced by the EIDL advance number. And I'll show you an example of that. The PPP characteristics, in contrast to the advance, are we have an explicit time frame. Currently it's 8 weeks. By Tuesday, could be something totally different. We have vested, restricted, or we have very restricted uses for forgiveness, and it incorporates the EIDL advance in that forgiveness amount. So let's say that we put in place an application for forgiveness that is less than the PPP loan that we received. So maybe we're asking for 125, or maybe we received a $125,000 PPP loan. We had $100,000 of forgivable expenses, and we had a $10,000 EIDL advance, formerly known as a grant. We apply for that $100,000 in forgiveness. The bank will apply for $100,000 in funding, and the SBA will provide them $90,000 in funding. So $90,000 funded to the lender, $10,000 is the advance. That's where you get your $100,000 total. The remaining $25,000 can be repaid or can be taken as a loan. Right now, those loan terms are currently being maneuvered by that House bill that I talked about previously. So we might have new information on what that loan looks like. The PPP forgivable expense equal to the PPP loan. So looking at it from a different scenario. Again, $125,000 in PPP loan. We'll assume $125,000 in forgivable expenses, and that we had that $10,000 EIDL advance. We apply for the $125,000 for our forgiveness number. The bank will apply to the SBA for $125,000 in funding. SBA will reduce that forgiveness funding by the EIDL advance number. So your lender will receive $115,000. You cannot apply for more than the principal of your PPP loan. So going back to some excerpts from that forgiveness application, we see where we've got line 8, 9, or 10. Line 8, what is the total allowable forgivable expenses within certain restrictions? Line 9, the total PPP loan. Line 10, what's payroll cost at 75%. Now, that again is part of the House bill, and that might change on us. But what's important is look at line 11, the forgiveness amount. Enter the smallest of those lines. So your forgiveness application is capped at your PPP loan. Going back to revisit those examples we were looking at, we have $125,000 in our PPP loan. We had a $10,000 EIDL advance, so we had $135,000 from the CARES Act. The maximum that we can seek forgiveness for, that $125,000. So what does that mean for the $10,000 advance or PPP loan? Regardless of its source, after you receive forgiveness, that excess $10,000 will remain and now considered a PPP loan. So in prior videos and in a lot of correspondence, I've encouraged people not to necessarily try to spend all of those PPP dollars. I want you to consider also those EIDL advance dollars to ensure you get them forgiven, or at least don't accidentally end up with a loan that you did not intend to. So let's go back to the EIDL loan, right? That separate piece that is apart from the advance. We saw that $150,000. It is low-cost capital at 3.75%. It is flexible payment terms. We have 12 months where we don't have to make a payment on that EIDL loan. And it's got an attractive term at 30 years. And from everything we're seeing, no prepayment penalty. So easy enough for us to get out of it. A lot of you are not necessarily looking to take on more debt than you need to. One of the items that I'm encouraging business owners, dentists to think about though is, we don't know what fall is going to look like. If we end up with a separate spike in COVID and we are asked to shut down our practice, having that loan to be able to preserve our cash and our working capital can be a very good buffer for us. We will have those 12 months, so it is very low cost to secure capital to allow future flexibility, given that we have so many unknowns. So that was just one last little piece that I wanted to leave you with as you think about and you have in front of you that EIDL loan application. As you have, obviously there will be much more to come. We'll see what the world looks like after the Senate gets their hands on that House bill, but please send us your questions. So you can see my contact information there or put that in a post below, and then our disclaimers. Thank you very much.